Good morning. We're still in Job, chapter 1. We're going to be around verse 6. When we were a lot younger, and I was at sea, and our youngest daughter was about late 3 years, I think. And the older two kids were in school. And normally we would have said, well, it's time for Bethany to go to nursery school. And Carol Ann said, no, I'm not going to give them that precious child. I'm going to spend time. Well, I'm going to have school here at home. So she got the coloring book and the books and all that other stuff. And Bethany said, I don't want anything to do with that. And so she said, okay, put her on the back of the bike. And they just rode all over southeastern Jacksonville. And one day, Bethany, these are the moments you try to capture when you can spend time with your kids. Bethany says, Mama, where is God? I don't remember exactly, not important really, the answer that Carol Ann gave, but Bethany gave it for her. Bethany came back and she says, he's in my tummy because I eat him every time. Now, what do you think she was thinking? She understood a little bit about God and that there was a sense in which he comes to dwell within us, right? I mean, this is not a dumb question. And it's a big question for everybody. And we're all trying to get the images in our minds and the ideas in our heads that will tell us, where's God? We all try to form this understanding, and a lot of times I think we get it wrong. And the most common way we get it wrong is the old, what I would call the man upstairs idea. Well, God's just another person who's in another room in this house. And if I could find the stairway, I could climb the stairway and I could see him, right? He's there and I could interact with him. What's wrong with that? Well, it places God on an equal par with us, which is just where we want it, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about God and where is God. Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then it goes on in chapter 2 to begin with laying the foundations of the earth and so forth. But he created heaven. Heaven is a created place. And it's important that we understand that God is not identified with his creation. He is not the man upstairs, a different kind of person. God is not inside his creation. He is outside of his creation. And what is outside of the creation? The spiritual part of heaven, the earth. What's outside of that? God. That's the hard thing. You can't get out of this thing that he's created. It is what it is. Heaven's a place we don't know a lot about. We'll talk a little bit about it today. It's a place where spiritual beings live and dwell, and we call them angels and other things. Earth is, of course, something we're very familiar with. We all exist in God in some way. That's a difficult thing to master. You may remember back in 1998, I think it was, Jim Carrey did a movie called The Truman Show. Remember that? Right. And it's this story about this gigantic dome, and in it is a world. It's got an ocean and it's got land, and Jim Carrey lives there. And he's unaware at first that he's being watched by the controller up there. And he becomes dissatisfied with that. And he wants to get out. And you remember, he sets sail in his little boat and he goes along until, boom, he comes to the wall. And then he moves along and there's a door. And he opens the door and he steps out into the real room. Now he's independent. That's kind of a silly story, but it's extremely meaningful because it is the attempt of man to escape the givenness of what God has created. We see that today in the trans movement. God has made me a man, but I intend to be a woman. And I can escape the givenness. I don't like what he's done. I can escape it. I can be what I want to be. I can create my own reality. And reality is that God has created the heavens and the earth the way he has created it. Hebrews 11 verse 3 says that the things that we can see have been created by the things that we can't see, and it's ultimately God. We can't see him. He's not a material being. I like to, and I think I've said this before, conceive of God and the earth as he has created us in his mind. I got that from a Boy's Life magazine when I was a kid, and it's always stuck with me. A little girl gave her address, and she said street, Cherry Street, Trumbull, Connecticut, the nation of America, the continent North America, the Western Hemisphere, the planet Earth, the solar system, the Milky Way. And then she said, the mind of God. We exist in the mind of God. Much like a young man might imagine his ideal girlfriend. Okay, and she's real to him because he can imagine. Well, with God, she's real. She's brunette and she's got brown eyes, and her name's Carol Ann. That's all I ever thought. So if you do that, it helps you understand some things. For example, it helps you understand the fact that since God knows his own mind, and we exist because he imagines our existence, he imagines us into existence, then there's nothing he doesn't know. He's omniscient, right? And because anything that happens is what God thinks to happen. The sparrow that falls, the hair that grows on your head, these things are thought by God, and therefore they are. Because of that, he's omnipotent. Anything he wants to happen can happen. If he wants to create a fish for Jonah, he creates it. That eliminates the entire problem of miracles, by the way. God is not bound in his creation. He is omnipotent. And because every place exists in the mind of God, but God is infinite mind, he's omniscient. He's everywhere. Much like, I think of, for example, Shakespeare creates Hamlet, and Hamlet exists in Shakespeare's mind. The thing that makes Shakespeare different from God is that God can then turn around and interact independently with his creation. I mean, we're told that he can be in heaven, right? We know that. Jesus said, when you pray, pray our Father who art in heaven. So Father, God can be in heaven, even though he is everywhere. He rules the creation from his throne in heaven. We see that in Exodus and in Ezekiel, and we see it especially in Revelation chapter 4. The throne of God, his authority rules over his creation from a place in heaven where he is. But also God can be on the earth. He can enter this creation. Of course, we know that. He walked with Adam in the garden. Jesus tabernacled with us. Emmanuel means God with us. And ultimately, God's plan is that he should dwell with men on an earth. Revelation chapter 21, verse 3 says that. Jack?
And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God.
All right, so we get a little bit of an introduction to God. Where is he? He is everywhere. He is in heaven. He can also be on earth. All right, and what does that have to do with Job? Well, we're introduced to Job as a person in the land of Uz who was a very good man, and so on and so forth. But the next thing we read begins in chapter 1, verse 6. And so read 6 and 7.
One day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it.
That is the NIV translation, which I like. It's a good translation. It's a readable one because it's idiomatic, but it isn't always very accurate. It tries to tell you what they meant, not what they said. Who has a different, Forge, you had the ESV, right? What does that verse say?
Verse 6.
Mm-hmm.
Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them.
Oh, and that's going to be in the King James, the Bible Jesus used. It's also in ASV and others, right? Yeah, sons of God. B'nai Elohim. Who are the sons of God? And so I want to take a peek into this place because this verse presents a number of questions. What are angelic beings anyway? What are they? Who are these sons of God? Are they the same thing as angels? Why is the Lord God, the Creator, receiving them in this place called heaven? Why would that be? And then, of course, how in the world is Satan, God's enemy, present in heaven and presenting himself to the Lord? I mean, do those questions bother you at all? I mean, you read this verse, you say, wait a minute, there's a lot of puzzling things. So let's get into that just a little bit. What are angels? Well, angels are spiritual beings. They are not physical beings, although we know that if God allows it, they can take on a physical form. One phrase, it's a guy by the name of Donal on the web put it this way. He said, angels are spirit beings made by God, so they are not made from matter, and their forms are not restricted by the laws of physics. They may appear in human form if God allows it, but many appear with animal or abstract features. Many are symbolic. Now, first thing is, they are not your friends or your relatives that have died, that are working to get their wings and all that stuff. That's a silly idea. These are created by God when he created the heavens and the earth, okay? Interesting, they are not bound by the laws of physics. How many remember the craze about UFOs in the 1970s? Eric von Daniken wrote a book which was called, anybody know? Chariots of the Gods. Remember? And he saw in Peru, there were some mountains that seemed to line up, and he said, this was an airstrip. And these aliens, and it went wild. Everybody was really into it. A lot of books were written. Great book written by Clifford Wilson, Close Encounters, A Better Explanation. And the interesting thing was that a lot of the investigations that went on came to this point that said they are not restricted. These things aren't restricted by laws of physics. They're not material things. And the report that the government put out said something on the order of these really belong to the family of paranormal phenomena, spiritual things. And with that, every scientist on that panel quit. They don't want to hear that. Isn't it interesting we're getting this again?
Yeah.
It's coming again. One of the advantages, and I tell this to Todd's boys all the time, one of the advantages of being an old guy is you've seen this stuff before, right? The UFO thing that we're talking about is once again coming to the fore. I think Jack Hibbs gave a message on Wednesday that talked about this. And he said the exact same thing Tim LaHaye said back in that day. And he said, basically, this idea of aliens is being given to us. It's a demonic sort of a phenomenon, and it's done by spiritual beings in order to condition us to explain when the church leaves that the aliens did it. Maybe so. Maybe so. Good possibility, I guess. So angels are spiritual beings. They don't behave like us. They're not your friends who've died. The interesting thing is I was looking for imagery, which is always part of the lesson. Just search the world for imagery and you find stuff. Is how much of a modern imagery is feminine. Yeah. You ever notice that? Yeah. We have a little plywood angel that we put in the living room at Christmas, and she's there like that. And she has flowing robes, and she's beautiful. She has all this hair coming down. Lovely, lovely. This one here, I wish you could see the whole picture. This is the Barbie angel. I mean, that looks right out of the Barbie movie, from whatever I've seen of it. But they always seem to be feminine, or else they're babies. You see the cherubs here. It's just cute and little and chubby and so forth. Feminine, beautiful, but weak, cherubic, like little babies. Or you see them as guardian angels, and they're mothers. They mother us, and they care for us, and they keep us from trouble. Why is that? Why would that be? Why is our modern conception of angels like that?
So we want to, anything, the Bible only talks about angels as being masculine and being warriors.
Oh, we'll go into that in a second, yeah.
But
why do we want to make them feminine?
we're we're trying to change the impression that everyone has of men, of strength.
Well, strength, okay. Tony, do you have something? Sorry. It's an auction, Tony. You don't do this. Yeah,
It has to be toxic masculinity.
toxic masculinity, that's it, right. Well, I look at it this way. We prefer our angels to be harmless and beautiful and nurturing. And there's certainly not a threat that's beyond our control. Is that the way angels are portrayed in the Bible? No, no. You remember Romy Downey as the gal that put that show together, Touched by an Angel? What is the angel like in that picture?
Well, I was just gonna say angels are all, like, right now, society's everything, God is love. So angels are loving and they're kind.
In a sentimental way.
Just here to
Yeah,
help
very
us.
sentimental.
There's
Absolutely.
nothing else to them when that's not. actually
Sure.
reality.
Yep, yeah. Romy Downey's character was sweet and helpful. She didn't really produce any trouble for the people she helped. I love the movie It's a Wonderful Life. Jimmy Stewart, you all watch that at Christmas? Remember the angel, Clarence? What's he? He's a duffer, right? He's kind of, harmless, a little bit eccentric, bumbling, and he's trying to earn his wings. We have this cultural impression of angels that makes us feel like they're no threat. Teresa.
Renaissance and all that, though, they also made them feminine.
I think that's very possible. Yeah, we'll see a lot of that. It isn't just modern culture. Some of these pictures are from ancient and medieval times. Now, the Bible never refers to angels in the feminine. All right, that's the first thing. There are no female names or pronouns. Give me the names of angels that you know from the Bible. Michael. Gabriel. Raphael, really? From the book of Tobit. That's like whenever I want to tell somebody something's in the Bible that isn't in the Bible, I always tell them it comes from Hezekiah. Hezekiah 12:4. There's no book of Hezekiah. There's also no book of Tobit. Okay, I went to the internet. All I could think of was Michael and Gabriel, and I went into the internet where all truth is, and I wanted to see names of angels in the Bible, and I got the 7 great angels, and there's Raphael and a whole bunch of some women, and I said, wait a minute, none of this is in the Bible. You go take your concordance and you can't find it. This is all Roman Catholic Church stuff from the Apocrypha and all those other things. No, the only names for angels are masculine, oddly enough. And if their gender is described, they are described always as male. For example, in Genesis 18, we see that Abraham met the Lord plus 2 men. Jack, you want to read that section?
The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. And then in verse 22, the men turned away and went toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord.
So one of these 3 men that appears to Abraham is the Lord God himself. We call that a Christophany, or a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. So this was the second person of Trinity. But the other 2 men are angels. And when they left, what did they go to do? Destroy Sodom, Gomorrah, and the cities of the plain. Yeah. Reduce the Dead Sea to a cinder, basically. They're pretty powerful. Now, I'm not saying there are only boy angels because only men are good and women are not. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's just that the Bible always refers to them as masculine, and I think because they don't have either one. They are not of either sex. Many angels may have feminine qualities. We don't know. Jesus said in Matthew 22:30 something about the resurrection when we will be like the angels. Jack?
At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven.
Well, that's interesting. That we will no longer marry. The marital bond, the conjugal relationship that produces children will not be in heaven. And he says that's the way the angels are. So angels are neither male nor female. They are, at least they don't have a reproductive role, and neither will we. And that raises an interesting question we were talking about this morning, a little rabbit trail we could go down for a minute. When we are in glory and we no longer have a marriage relationship that produces children, that capability, that responsibility is gone forever, which makes you realize what a privilege it is. Will Carol Ann still be feminine? Will Jack still be masculine? What do you think? I think so, because there's a whole lot more to being male or female than reproduction. In fact, I think if we're going to explore the full dimension of being in the image of God, that includes both. And so angels are like that. They do not have a reproductive capability. All the angels that were created are all that there aren't going to be any more. And this may explain, by the way, the attraction of fallen angels to human women. Because the fact is that mankind, as they saw it, can reproduce more. And they can't. What we need to do is to find a way to use the woman to produce more of our own kind, especially if we're in rebellion against God and we need reinforcements. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to look at someday. Now, the Hebrew word, yeah, Jay.
They must be kind of scary too. So many times the Bible said, "Fear not," when an angel appears there.
Mhm.
And I can't explain that, but it references them, tells them not to be afraid.
Well, good point. Let's go there. The translation to angel is normally the Hebrew word malak, as if we care or know, but malak is the word, but it is a word that is translated messenger. So some angels, the ones we call angels, are simply messengers. It's a functional designation. It's what they do. And the encounters with messengers, in which all cases they have a human form. And by the way, they do not have wings. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that these messengers that appear to men, these angels, have wings. That was a 4th century and beyond artistic creation, just so you know. For example, some of them produce real terror, some of them don't. When Gabriel appears to Mary to announce the birth of Jesus, it just says that she was troubled. This is a 12, 13, 14-year-old girl who's receives Gabriel, this angel, and she's troubled. I mean, obviously, who are you? But we don't see this terror that sometimes happens. But at the same time, if you go and look at Daniel 8:17, and then verse 27, Gabriel comes to Daniel and he passes out. Jack.
As he came near the place where I was standing, I was terrified and fell prostrate. "Son of man," he said to me, "understand that the vision concerns the time of the end." And then 27, I, Daniel, was exhausted and lay ill for several days.
This is when Gabriel appears to Daniel for the first time. He passes out. And we see that a whole lot more than we see the nice, benign interaction. In fact, more often than not, heavenly beings are quite different, and they terrify the humans that they encounter. For example, when Jesus rose from the dead, it says that an angel came, there was an earthquake, and a stone was rolled away from the door. I like to think that this was one of the first explosive events that you would have. He comes down and this earth's shaking, and he goes boom, and this big rock just goes to smithereens. And what happens? Read that passage, Jack.
There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men.
There you go, passed out again, right? The interesting thing to me is that in the verses following, the women are going to the tomb and they don't pass out. He speaks kindly to them. Interesting. Yep.
It appears that the angels can manifest themselves for whatever purpose the manifestation is. If
Exactly.
they want to terrify you, you will be terrified.
You will be
If they
terrified.
want to comfort you, you will be comforted.
Yeah. Anybody ever read the book by C.S. Lewis in the space trilogy called Paralandra? Okay. There is a passage in that book where these Eldils, which is his angels, are trying to figure out how do we present ourselves to ransom this human being, this weakling. How are we going to present himself? And they try to find a way to do that. And it just terrifies him. It's a really neat passage. And it just turns his world upside down. And he says, stop. I can't take it. Well, that's kind of what can happen. My favorite one is Daniel's vision in chapter 10, where he sees this man on the other side of the Tigris. And go ahead. Why don't you read that passage, those verses?
On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen, with a belt of the finest gold around his waist. His body was like chrysolite, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. The men with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. A hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And then skipping to verse 17, how can I, your servant, talk with you, my Lord? My strength is gone, and I can hardly breathe.
Now that is a pretty terrifying encounter, isn't it? Yeah, and I think more often than not, you'll have encounters like this where the person sees a heavenly being, and you can't describe it. I mean, all the things, the metaphors, the similes he's using is trying to describe something spiritual, but it's incredibly glorious, incredibly powerful, incredibly scary, and yet comes to talk to him. Now, back to Job. This is a council, a meeting of the sons of God. It doesn't say Malak, it says Bene Elohim, which is the sons of God. It's a little bit different. Michael Heiser is a professor who is a specialist in ancient history and Semitic languages. He wrote a book called The Unseen Realm, and in it he says this: in the ancient Semitic world, sons of God, that is the Hebrew Bene Elohim, is a phrase used to identify divine or heavenly beings with higher level responsibilities or jurisdictions. The term angel, malak, describes an important but still lesser task, delivering messages, unquote. Now they are gods in one sense. You can use the word Elohim with a capital E to refer to the creator. You use the word Elohim occasionally to mean gods who are not really God, but nevertheless powerful heavenly angel beings. They're invested with some power and authority. They are still creations. They are part of the created world, created by the Most High, and they are part of the heavens and the earth. What do we know about them? Well, let's just talk about a few things. First of all, these sons of God, that frame again, comes up in Job 38, where God begins to speak in one of the most wonderful passages in the Bible. And he says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? 38, 4-7, Jack.
Where were you when I laid the foundations, I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set, or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy.
Now, if you go back to the ESV or NASB or even KJV, it will not say the angels shouted for joy. It will say the sons of God shouted for joy. They were present at the foundation of the earth. Now, it makes you wonder, when were they created? Well, Genesis 1:1 says God created the heavens and the earth. And by the time we get to the earth, there are angels. So we don't know what happens between those 2 points. God perhaps created the angels at that point. I just don't know, and I'm not going to try to answer the question. But it's very interesting that they were present when the earth the foundations were laid. It was formless and void, and God began to create the earth out of out of the matter that he had there. It says that water was all around the earth, and the Spirit of God moved on the face of the deep. And then he said, "Let there be light," and that began the creation or the forming of the earth. So they were there. It says that the angels, the morning stars, sang together. Now that's another thing. Stars are sometimes identified with angels, so you'll see that. The sons of God were sang for joy. So they were all present. And oftentimes when you see pagans worshiping the host of heaven, that's what they're worshiping. They're worshiping angelic beings that they identify with stars. I think it's metaphorical, but nevertheless they do. Secondly, they wield incredible power. I mean, the two angels that met with Abraham went down and destroyed a whole bunch of cities with fire from heaven. The angel of death went through the firstborn of all of Egypt, killed them all. Tremendous power. Now, in Job's case, verse 16, it says that all his sheep, and he had thousands of them, and all of his farmers, all of his tenants, except one, were destroyed by fire of God from heaven. Angels had to do that. Even if Satan did it, it was an angel. So then we begin to see something interesting. They are engaged in a great conflict. Now, this you want to go to Daniel chapter 10 for. We can't read the whole thing, but it's very instructive. Chapter 10, verses 12 and 13, then a little bit later, 20 and 21, Jack.
Then he continued, "Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia." Down to verse 20 and 21. "So he said, 'Do you know why I have come to you? Soon I will return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I go, the prince of Greece will come. But first I will tell you what is written in the book of truth. No one supports me against them except Michael, your prince.'"
Where was Daniel when he had this vision? Anybody know? What country was he in? Persia. Persia. And what we see is that an angel messenger from God came to speak to him, and he was prevented by this prince of Persia. Well, who's the prince of Persia? And get this. And then he says, "I got to go back and fight with him again." The prince was apparently preventing him from reaching to Daniel. And then he says, "And then the prince of Greece will come." Well, we all know that after Persia fell, the prince of Greece was Alexander the Great, or at least the human leader was. And so he's talking about angelic beings, sons of God, who have been given this conflict. They're involved in this great conflict. One more thing that you get out of this passage. They're divided by rank. Angels aren't just all little babies. They're not all cute girls with the harps. They're not all messengers. They're not all sons of God, apparently. They are divided by rank. It says that Michael is a chief prince. He's one of the chief princes. Jude 9 calls him an archangel, the archangel who disputed with the devil himself over the body of Moses. Now, interesting, when Michael disputes with the devil himself about the body of Moses, it says he dared not rebuke him. Why? Because Satan outranks him. Satan is more powerful than he is. And so he invoked the Lord's rebuke. He said, "May the Lord rebuke you." There's a lesson in that for us, I think. Sometimes we get into this spiritual warfare thing and we want to stand up and say, "I rebuke you, Satan." Be careful. He outranks you. He outranks Gabriel. He outranks Michael. We'll talk about him again in a little bit. Perhaps Michael's going to be the archangel that we're all waiting for. 1 Thessalonians 4:16.
"For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first."
We were just talking about, is that trumpet going to be a shofar? Maybe Len's shofar will give you an idea what I don't know. But I love that phrase. "Then the Lord himself will descend with the shout of the archangel." Maybe that's Michael. Maybe it's another one. I don't know. But there will be an angel involved in that. Now, we're all familiar with the verse in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, which talks about all these different rankings and powers. 6 verse 12, Jack.
For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms.
Yeah, rulers, princes, power over, they seem to have, at least these sons of God, have assigned jurisdictions, which is why the prince of Persia would try to prevent God's messenger from getting to someone in Persia. Now, in verse 20, he says he's going to go back and fight against him, and later in Greece and so forth. In verse 21, Michael is referred to as your prince, referring to Israel. You see that in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. Jack?
At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of the nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered.
So the prince that is particularly concerned with Israel is Michael. Michael is your prince, Israel, and he will in the last days rise up. And we'll see how a little bit of that will happen. Now, this idea of jurisdictions, I think we're not comfortable with it. We don't fully understand it. How did it come about? Let me give you a couple of thoughts on this. And this has to do with these sons of God. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, in verses 7 and 8, that seems to answer the question how these princes became assigned to certain nations and peoples. Go ahead.
Remember the days of old. Consider the generations long past. Ask your father, and he will tell you, your elders, and they will explain to you. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel.
That's a fascinating phrase. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Now, in the Masoretic text, which dates back to about 1100, it says Israel. But the Septuagint, which goes back 1300 years before that, that says sons of God. And then we discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, which themselves are originals from about 100 to 200 BC, 1300 years older, and it says the sons of God. And that makes a lot more sense out of that passage, doesn't it? Because Israel didn't exist at this point. But the Most High divided all mankind and set up boundaries for the people according to the number of the sons of God. The Prince of Persia has a responsibility for Persia. And the Prince of Greece will have responsibility for all of Greece. And I imagine there's a Prince of the United States. I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't true. Now, these princes are among the sons of God, but interesting, these are the inheritance of the nations. He says something right after that, verse 9. It says, for the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is allotted his inheritance, okay? The Lord has kept Israel for himself. They are his inheritance. And you might ask the question, why does God separate out Israel? Israel didn't even exist back then, right? Why did the Lord do that? And there's some very interesting answers to that. We go to Psalm 82. Okay, Psalm 82, which is right here. Okay. Verses 1 and 6, Jack.
God presides in the great assembly. He gives judgment among the gods.
Wait a minute. Oh, verse 6 too, yeah.
I said, you are gods. You are all sons of the Most High.
Okay. God presides over an assembly, and this is an assembly that he renders judgment among the gods. The word is Elohim, it's small g, gods. And it says in verse 6 that these are the sons of God. Same thing as in Job's assembly. They are meeting with the Creator, with Almighty God, and he is passing judgment on them. And when you read this thing, once you change that word from Israel to sons of God, it makes a little bit of sense. What is he doing? It says, how long will you defend the unjust and show partiality? He's rebuking the sons of God who have responsibility for at least some of the nations. Verses, let's read 2-7.
How long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked? Defend the cause of the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the rights of the poor and oppressed. Rescue the weak and needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They know nothing. They understand nothing. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods. You are all sons of the Most High. But you will die like mere men. You will fall like every other ruler.
Wow. Now, this is kind of interesting. God has apportioned to the nations, to the sons of God, these angelic beings, given them responsibility. These are the principalities and powers and so forth that we see in Ephesians 6. But at least to some of them, he is passing judgment and saying, you guys have failed. You have been seduced by power, perhaps by Satan himself, and you will die like men. What does that mean? Well, die is to be separated from God for all eternity. And they will, as it says in Revelation, be sent to the lake of fire and brimstone, which is made for the devil and his angels. So here we have at least some of these princes are failing to do what they are required to do by God. They have turned against him. They have been tempted by power and perhaps lust, and they've failed. And this explains, I think, the princes of Persia and of Greece. Now, to preserve an avenue for the promised Redeemer, God forges a new relationship with a guy named Abraham, and he gives Abraham a people which becomes his inheritance. Isn't that interesting? Genesis 3:15, we have the promise that God will make it right. He will destroy Satan and his works, and he will bring a Redeemer, the seed of the woman. Remember, there was the battle of the seeds we talked about. And that went on through the pre-flood world. It caused God to destroy all mankind by the flood. And then we begin again with Noah. And as we've begun with Noah, men falls again. And men fall into sin. And the princes that rule over the nations fall away from God. And so he says, I'm going to start with Abraham, and we're going to create my inheritance. And I will redeem the world through my inheritance. I think that's fascinating. These other rulers will all eventually die. But they haven't been kicked out of heaven. They still have responsibility. They still are appearing before God. Psalm 89 tells us a little bit about that. Verses 5-7.
The heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness too in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies above can compare with the Lord? Who is like the Lord among the heavenly beings? In the council of the holy ones, God is greatly feared. He is more awesome than all who surround him.
This is the assembly of angelic beings, the sons of God, before God, and he is presiding over this assembly. Now, the atmosphere may be rather tense, between them, but they are still heavenly beings. Now, how does Satan come into this? He suddenly appears. Well, he's a little bit different, right? In fact, the higher you go on the ladder of ranking in the angelic world, the more weird they look. And because they're trying to create an image that men can see of something that men can't see, right? I mean, you've got the cherubim with eyes all over them and four heads. I mean, this is another one of the cherubim. You have the wheel within the wheel and the cherubs over here. This is a picture of Ezekiel's vision. You've got the seraphs. You see that in Revelation. That's a real wild one up there at the top, with all their wings and they are all. I want to give us a sense of the majesty and the glory and the amazing power of these people. Let's see. Let's read Ezekiel's vision in Ezekiel 1. Now, we'll only read portions. I really encourage you to read it all because it's amazing. Go ahead, Jack.
I looked, and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. In appearance, their form was that of a man but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf and gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings on their 4 sides, they had the hands of a man. All 4 of them had faces and wings, and their wings touched one another. Each one went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved. Skipping to verse 13 through 16. The appearance of the living creatures was like burning coals of fire or like torches. Fire moved back and forth among the creatures. It was bright, and lightning flashed out of it. The creatures sped back and forth like flashes of lightning. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground beside each creature with its 4 faces. This was the appearance and structure of the wheels. They sparkled like chrysolite, and all 4 looked alike. Each appeared to be made like a wheel intersecting a wheel. And then verse 18, their rims were high and awesome, and all 4 rims were full of eyes all around.
That's wild, isn't it? I mean, just read that through from beginning to end, and you say, wow, Ezekiel must have been blown away. This is telling you about creatures around the throne of God. Another picture of the throne of God is in Revelation 4, which I'm not going to read all of it, but it talks about this glorious throne, a symbol of authority in heaven, somebody sitting on it, which would be God. And then he has the appearance of a diamond and a ruby, and he's got this emerald rainbow around him. And seated all around were 24 elders dressed in white. And out of this throne, there comes flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder. In front of the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. Now, keep that in your mind. 7 lamps around the throne at the center of this lake. And these are the 7 spirits of God, or the 7-fold Spirit of God. And then it says later on, in the center, around the throne, this is very close to the throne, were 4 living creatures covered with eyes in front and back. The first was like a lion. The second was like an ox. And we're talking again about the cherubim. I mean, you just read this, and it is not only surreal, it's just amazing. This is God's throne. And around the throne, at the very middle, right close to it, away from everything else, are these creatures we call cherubim. Now, to the ancients, they had the concept of throne guards. A king or an emperor would have the biggest, baddest soldiers right next to his throne. They were his bodyguards. They were his confidants. They were the ones he trusted the most, and they were the ones to be his protection and his glory. Okay? Now, having said that, let's jump to Satan's origin, because Satan is a throne guard. All right. In Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14, that's where we hear how Satan became Satan, Lucifer became Satan. Here's what the Lord says about him in Ezekiel 28. Go ahead, Jack.
You were the model of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you: ruby, topaz and emerald, chrysolite, onyx and jasper, sapphire, turquoise and beryl. Your settings and mountings were made of gold. On the day you were created, they were prepared. You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you.
Okay, Lucifer, Satan, is a guardian angel. He is a throne guard. It says you were appointed the guardian cherub, one of those amazing, crazy, just incomprehensible creatures. He was right there. Okay, so that's why you would say he outranks everybody else we've been talking about. Okay, now the interesting thing is he became Satan. Wickedness was found in him, and he fell, obviously. But his destiny, and this goes to how he could be at this meeting, his destiny comes in 2 phases, all right? In Ezekiel 28:16, the end, what does it say, Jack?
So I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God and I expelled you, O guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones.
Now remember in Revelation, around the throne were 7 torches or fires representing the Spirit of God. So he says you were thrown out from your position next to the Lord God among the fiery stones in the Holy Spirit and away from the mountain of God. So he was demoted, but he wasn't cast out of heaven yet. That's going to come. You see that. He says he's the prince of this world. He's been thrown out from the flaming torches, and he is still in heaven. Now we'll talk about how he gets thrown out of heaven in a second. At the minimum, in my view, the devil and the sons of God, even those who have misbehaved and that God has rebuked in Psalm 82, they are present at this meeting. They are present in heaven, and they are presenting themselves before the God of creation. Now, the conflict, if you look at this conflict, it appears to me that the conflict between these angels is not in heaven yet. It is on the earth. Remember, every time you see there's a conflict, it has to do with getting access to somebody on the earth. In Job 1, verse 7, God says, where have you come from? And he says, I've been roaming to and fro around the earth. I've been doing my thing down on the earth. He is now the prince of this world, and he goes to and fro. And I think God keeps a limit on what he can do. Remember when the angels decided to try to procreate using human women, they were cast into the abyss, which terrified all the others and said, don't do that. God has a way of restraining us. Okay. But the judgment that he's going to be cast out of heaven hadn't occurred yet, because he appears at this convocation, and you'll see that he is prophesied to be cast out of heaven. Ezekiel 28:17, Jack.
Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I threw you to the earth. I made a spectacle of you before kings.
Okay, why do I come out with the idea that hasn't happened yet? Remember, this is a prophetic passage talking about the king of Tyre, and behind him it talks about Satan. And king of Tyre hadn't been destroyed yet. So these things are prophetic in that sense. Okay, well, when is he actually going to be cast out? And we get that in Revelation chapter 12, where there is a vision of Satan being cast out. Verses 7-9, Jack.
And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, the ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and the angels and his angels with him.
Now, this is taking place at the end of days. This would be during the tribulation, probably. We know that it's to the end of days because in chapter 12, verse 12, it says, rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them, and woe, that's all the angels, okay? And woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has now gone down to you, and he is filled with fury because he knows his time is short. So in Job's day, Satan is able to attend, and all the sons of God attend this council. Mari. I can't understand.
Just see.
Jacob, go ahead, buddy. So, anybody who's standing here, pays no attention to us today. We're trying to tell them, hey, there's a hint. No, they don't see us. Okay.
So if Satan was a cherubim who was a guard from God of temple, then why was he portrayed as a serpent in the Garden of Eden and then a dragon later?
Okay, good question. Satan is a spiritual being. We know that angels and spiritual beings can take possession of a man. They can take possession of an animal. We have Balaam's ass, right? He spoke, and an angel can speak that way. So they have that capability. But the devil is not, he's not an ass. He's not a snake, and he is certainly not, what am I forgetting? Dragon, thank you. Okay, he's not. But he is the power behind them. And so we're trying to explain things that are going on in a world we can't see with things that we can see. So it's difficult, but it's still the same guy. Now, back in Job's day, Yahweh presides over his assembly or his council as described in Psalm 89. And, well, where you go? Psalm 89. And he says, the heavens praise your wonders, Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies above can compare with Yahweh, the Lord? Who is like Yahweh among the heavenly beings? In the council of the holy ones, God is greatly feared, and he is more awesome than all those who surround him. So Satan and the sons of God, all of the sons of God are present in Job chapter 1, verse 6, where they present themselves before God and Satan comes into the picture. Now that we've sort of laid that picture for you, God speaks and he says, have you considered my servant Job? Poor Job. Poor Job. There he is, living in his villa on the earth. He got a nice place. He's blessed by God. He knows God is blessed and he's thankful. He's got a good life. He's wealthy, has few cares in this world. He only worries about his kids a little bit. Are you beginning to identify with that? We're in good shape. We're free. We're blessed of God. We're grateful. We worship him. Jack, why don't you read that one statement?
Little does Job know that an entire unseen world of infinite glory, power, and authority is assembled to consider his life, and that God is about to balance his reputation and the comfort of thousands of suffering generations on trials that will push him to limits of suffering that few men have ever known. Perhaps one day that great assembly will convene once again, and the Lord will ask Satan, have you considered my servant?
Okay, that's it. Mm-hmm. He doesn't know what's coming, and neither do you. And you would think, having laid this picture as best we can of the heavenly beings and the enormous power and the majesty of God and these creatures in heaven, it makes earth look tiny. It makes us look utterly and totally insignificant. He's nothing but a grain of sand. He's going to be around for a while and then he'll be gone. As a matter of fact, the angels many times scorn mankind because of that. He's insignificant, and yet all of that glory is amassed together with the creator of heaven and earth to consider his life. And on his life and his response in the weeks to come will hang the reputation of God, who says, no one's like him. He's a righteous man. He serves me. You can count on him. He better. If it wasn't for Job, God's reputation would be tarnished. If Job had failed, thousands of generations like you and me would have very little consolation in the midst of great suffering. So I think Job may well represent you and me. We may be on the brink of great suffering. We may not. We may die with our family all around us in peace, which may he grant us that. Okay? But we may end up being there. We are both insignificant and incredibly significant. The day may come when God convenes the heavenly council of all these powers and all these glories, and he says, have you considered my servant, Mike? And Mike doesn't know. But he may be in for a rough ride. Maybe all of us would be in for a rough ride. So what do we do? Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, he's sitting there in his chair, and behind him, up in an area he can't see, is all this glory. He says, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race that's marked out for us, whatever it is, whatever lies ahead, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of truth.